Hello everyone and welcome to my YouTube channel. Watch my video and subscribe my channel. Ridge resolves to leave LA alone since he does not want to hurt anyone longer. Ridge Forrester sat in his dimly lit office at Forrester Creations, staring out the window as the Los Angeles skyline glimmered in the distance. The city that had been his empire, his battlefield, and his prison all at once. And in that solitary moment, he finally admitted to himself what he had refused to acknowledge for years, that his very presence had become a source of turmoil for the people he loved most, that every decision he made seemed to ripple outward like a destructive tide, pulling Brooke Logan's heart one way. Taylor Hayes hopes another, leaving his children, Steffi and Thomas, to pick up emotional debris, while Hope Logan, Liam Spencer, and even Brooke's daughter found themselves ensnared in the crossfire of his restless soul. And so he decided, quietly and without fanfare, that he would leave Los Angeles, not to chase another woman, or to escape to some exotic destination as he once had done in the reckless days of youth, but because he genuinely believed that his absence might finally bring peace to those who had spent too many years living in the shadow of his indecision, his passion, his temper, and his unrelenting need to control the narrative of love and loyalty that surrounded the Forrester dynasty. He thought of Brooke, the woman who had been both his destiny and his destruction, their love story written in bold, messy strokes across decades of reunions, betrayals, and miraculous second chances. And he wondered if leaving without saying anything would finally free her from the endless push and pull between them, allowing her to rediscover herself without waiting for the next phone call, the next knock at her door, or the next promise that he might stay this time. He thought of Taylor, the woman who had always loved him with a steadfast, almost sacrificial devotion, the mother of his children who had spent years putting her own happiness on hold in case Ridge Forrester would one day return to her arms for good. And he knew that by leaving, he was possibly sparing her the final, cruel heartbreak of watching him choose another over her. Steffi, of course, would be furious. His daughter, strong and proud, would accuse him of fleeing, of abandoning the family just when they needed stability, especially given the chaos Luna Nazoa's attack had recently brought into their lives, with Liam's shooting still haunting the hospital halls and Finn torn between loyalty to his wife and the creeping sense of betrayal that family secrets had once again cost them peace. Thomas, ever erratic, may see his father's departure as both a betrayal and a relief, because Ridge's shadow had always hung over his creative and personal choices, sometimes fostering, sometimes smothering. His father, Eric Forrester, was recovering from his own health problems, and though Ridge adored him, he couldn't bear the thought of watching the patriarch struggle for breath while family members fought over who belonged at his bedside. Brooke with her comforting words, Donna with her ever-patient affection, or Ridge with his guilt-laden presence that always seemed to spark conflict where none was needed. So, late that night, Ridge began drafting a letter, not a dramatic farewell, but a series of notes, one for Brooke, one for Taylor, one for Steffi, one for Thomas, even one for RJ and Hope, explaining that this was not an act of selfishness, but a final act of love, the kind of love that sometimes required letting go so that the world around you could breathe. In Brooke's letter, he wrote of Italy, how saving her from drowning there had reminded him of what was real between them, but also how that moment had reignited a cycle he feared would never end. A cycle that made them both hostages to a history that was beautiful, but also bruising. In Taylor's, he wrote that she deserved a man who chose her without hesitation, without ghosts haunting the choice. To his children, he wrote that their legacy was strong enough to thrive with Ridge packed lightly. In the morning, no entourage, no dramatic declarations, just a single suitcase and a quiet ride to the airport, leaving behind a city that would wake to headlines speculating on his whereabouts, board meetings in disarray, Brooke's tearful confusion, Taylor's simmering anger turning perhaps to sorrow, and Bill Spencer smirking in the background, sensing a power vacuum he could exploit. However, as the plane took off, Ridge felt an unfamiliar stillness, a peace that had eluded him amidst the clamor of fashion shows, tabloid scandals, and the eternal triangle that defined his adult life. He wondered if absence might become the greatest gift he had ever given Los Angeles, a city addicted to his presence, and whether, in the silence of his departure, those he loved might finally find the happiness they had been expecting him to provide. Brooke stood at her window that evening, reading his note repeatedly, her fingers trembling over the words that said he would always love her but could no longer keep hurting her. Taylor, on the other hand, ripped hers apart at first read, cursing him for cowardice even as tears betrayed how much she would miss the dream of them. Steffi called Finn, her voice breaking as she vowed to track her father down, while Thomas locked himself in the design room, sketching Fu Hope strangely felt a weird calm, for with Ridge gone, perhaps Liam could focus on mending without the family's manipulations tearing at every strand of their marriage. And perhaps Brooke, her mother, could finally close a chapter that had defined her for far too long. Days turned into weeks, and Ridge's absence reshaped the Forrester landscape. Eric appointed Carter as interim CEO, Brooke rediscovering her own business instincts, Taylor taking a sabbatical from her practice to spend time with her grandchildren, and Steffi, ever the warrior, began combining elements of her father's vision with her own to keep Forrester Creations thriving. But whispers persisted that Ridge was seen in Paris, that he was sketching in Monte Carlo, that he was living anonymously in some quiet coastal town where no one knew the name Forrester. And with each whisper, Ridge's legend grew, even as the man himself sought only to shrink, to dissolve into something simpler, something free. And perhaps one day he will return, not as the savior or the center, but as a man who has finally realized that love is not possession, family is not control, and knowing when to pull back is sometimes the greatest act of leadership. Weeks passed, and the corridors of Forrester Creations fell unnaturally silent without Ridge's presence. His designs no longer cluttered the design tables, his voice no longer cut through boardroom disputes, and his chair at family dinners stood vacant, like a scar in the room. Brooke Logan tried to move on, but each night when the house fell silent, she would pour a glass of wine and unfold Ridge's letter again, scanning his words for hidden meaning, for a hint of when or if he might return, torn between the part of her that wanted to chase him and the wiser part that whispered, "Let him go, Brooke, or you'll never know who you are without him." Taylor Hayes, meanwhile, alternated between rage and despair, lashing out in therapy sessions she attempted to provide for others, while secretly, that her father's decision was not a failure, but a reset, that the Forrester name would not crumble because one man stepped away. However, at night, alone with Finn, she confessed her fears that the family was unraveling from within, that Thomas's erratic sketches and Brooke's glassy stares were only the beginning of fractures they couldn't yet see. Thomas, the artist haunted by abandonment, poured his grief into a controversial new line. Dark, sensual, almost gothic. He whispered to Hope during late-night design sessions that perhaps his father had done them a favor by leaving, because now they could create without his shadow. However, he still yearned for a father's approval. Eric, watching it all from his living room as Donna massaged his hands and encouraged him to breathe, felt the anguish of history repeating itself. Another Forrester man seeking seclusion rather than confronting the family storm head-on. And across town, Bill Spencer read the headlines with a knowing smirk, already planning how to intervene. To console Brooke, to whisper in Steffi's ear about new business relationships, to quietly portray himself as the strong presence Ridge had failed to be. But what none of them knew was that Ridge had not gone to Paris or Monte Carlo as the tabloids claimed. He had gone to a quiet coastal village in Portugal, renting a modest villa where no one called him Ridge Forrester, where he walked the cliffs at dawn and sketched for no one but himself, where the only name that mattered was the one he whispered into the ocean wind when he thought of the children he loved but had left behind. Every day he wrote in his journal, battling with the question that had haunted him since the night he left. Was I a coward for leaving, or was I strong for once in my life by not attempting to repair what I was constantly breaking? Letters arrived from Brooke, Steffi, and even Hope, who informed him that Liam had awoken from his coma and was asking about him, but he held them unopened for weeks, terrified that if he read them, he would begin to believe he was still needed. Then came a letter from his father, Eric, written with unsteady hands and too much reality, stating, You think leaving protects us, but absence is its own kind of wound, son. Come home when you're ready, but don't confuse vanishing with mending. Ridge kept that letter by his nightstand, reading it every night, as if waiting for an invisible compass to tell him when the time was right. Meanwhile, back in L.A., the vacuum left by Ridge's departure began to twist into something dangerous. Steffi and Thomas, once united by their father's vision, started feuding over control of the next couture collection. Brooke and Taylor, surprisingly, found themselves bonding over mutual abandonment, both women laughing bitterly one night over wine as they admitted that perhaps Ridge had been the problem all along. And Finn began questioning why the Forrester family allow suspicions arose that Ridge had met someone abroad, a mystery and invisible woman, fueling tabloids and jeopardizing Brooke's fragile path to closure, while Bill Spencer fueled those suspicions to keep the Forrester women on edge. Ridge had met no one in Portugal, unless you counted the version of himself he was gradually growing to know, a man who loved profoundly but led poorly, who made beauty but frequently caused ruin. And as the waves broke against the cliffs one starry night, Ridge murmured a vow not to return until he could do so without causing further damage, a vow that could last months, years, or even a single phone call from a voice that reminded him of what and who was actually waiting. Months passed, and the once vibrant bustle of Forrester Creations became colder, more transactional, as if the building itself had accepted Ridge Forrester's possible departure. Brooke Logan, after weeks of staring at his letter as if it were a riddle only her heart could solve, finally packed away the photographs of them together, the wedding in the garden, the kiss in Italy after he saved her from drowning, the countless holiday dinners that had always felt both perfect and fragile, and began rebuilding her independence, delving into a skincare line she had long put off. Taylor Hayes, in contrast, became restless, traveling to Aspen, Paris, and even Monaco under the guise of lectures and therapy workshops, but really chasing the ghost of the man she couldn't stop loving. She told Steffi over coffee one morning, "Your father thinks he's sparing us, but he's only teaching us to live in waiting rooms." Steffi, hardened by leadership and the Luna Nozoa aftermath that still lingered like smoke after a fire, snapped back that she didn't. Thomas, meantime, had turned his pain into art so aggressively that fashion blogs across Europe began to speak his name independently of Ridge's. Dark, sensual lines that told stories of absence and hunger, and despite some critics calling it exploitative of family tragedy, it sold like hotcakes. Eric, the patriarch, became quieter with each passing week. Donna worried for his health as he perused the one brief letter Ridge had sent. No return address. Just a sketch of the Portuguese cliffs and the words. Still breathing. Still thinking. Even RJ, usually the quiet one, surprised everyone by stepping into the design studio and offering to apprentice under Thomas, saying, "If Dad's not coming back, we can't let the legacy fall apart." Across town, Bill Spencer saw the shifting tides as opportunity. He courted Brooke's business partnership under the guise of friendship, offered Steffi a strategic alliance with Spencer Publications, and kept a close eye on Taylor's loneliness, though she refused. Finn was the first to say it out loud. "Have any of you actually tried to track him? What if someone doesn't want him to return?" The theory initially appeared paranoid until Carter discovered a series of financial anomalies. Private flight bookings under false names, cancel hotel reservations, and a mysterious wire transfer that led not to Ridge, but to an offshore account linked to Nick Marone, the very man who had once tried to woo Brooke away. Brooke's pulse raced when Carter showed her. Might Nick have orchestrated a plan to isolate Ridge, to make his departure appear voluntary while keeping him away? Taylor dismissed it as chasing ghosts, but Steffi, secretly enraged and terrified, hired a private investigator. Meanwhile, in that tranquil Portuguese village, Ridge began to see eyes on him. A shadow staying too long at the market, a voice on the phone that hung up when he responded. That night he wrote in his journal, maybe leaving Los Angeles did not save them. Perhaps it exposed them. He began sketching a dress unlike any he had previously drawn, a gown of armor with powerful lines, covered shoulders, and a warrior's form for a woman capable of surviving without him. As autumn arrived in California, tensions rose. Eric's health deteriorated. Steffi and Thomas threatened to split the company into two rival lines, and Brooke stood on her balcony, whispering into the night, "Ridge, if you can hear me, come home before it's too late." That night, Ridge received Eric's second letter, which was not gentle, but pleading. "I may not have many, Khalid. Don't allow me leave this world believing that my family was scattered because you were too proud to stay." Ridge read it twice and packed a single bag. But before he could leave for the airport, a man walked out of the shadows, a figure from his past, and asked, "Going somewhere, Ridge?" "Not without finishing what you started." His name was Nick Marone. Nick Marone's unexpected entrance in that darkly lit Portuguese home broke the frail cocoon Ridge had erected for himself. The quiet mornings of sketching and the evenings of reflective seclusion suddenly humming with an old rivalry reignited. "You always thought leaving was noble, Ridge," Nick said with that smug, sea-worn grin that Brooke once found charming. "But some of us know how to steer a storm instead of running from it." Ridge's jaw tightened. This was the man who had once circled Brooke like a shark, promising her a simpler, more stable future, only to vanish when her heart inevitably drifted back to Ridge. Now he was here, in the one place Ridge felt no one could find him, claiming he had merely come to chat. But his tone was tinged with something more: strategy, leverage, an undercurrent that implied he might have played a role in Ridge's peaceful imprisonment. "Do you think Brooke is just waiting?" Nick inquired, placing a folded paper on the table. A newspaper cut of Brooke's face beside Bill Spencer at a charity banquet, her hand on his arm. "LA does not stop for you, Ridge." Ridge didn't flinch, or maybe he did, in the twitch of his fingers longing to call Brooke. But he said nothing but asked, "Why now?" Nick smirked. "Because while you were painting on cliffs, your family was eating itself alive. Thomas is poised to proclaim independence. Steffi is circling the sharks. Eric's health is fading, and Bill is moving in on everything. And if you think he's just doing it for business, you don't know Bill Spencer at all." Ridge breathed slowly. He had left to protect them, but now it appeared that his absence was being used against them. Meanwhile, in Los Angeles, Brooke Logan gazed at her phone for the umpteenth time that week, the private investigator's newest report burning a hole in her mind. Ridge had been observed, confirmed, and alive, but why hadn't he returned home? Taylor Hayes across town was unraveling in a different way, her professional mask cracking as she canceled 3 therapy sessions in one afternoon, blaming it on jet lag, when in reality it was the letter Ridge had sent her weeks ago, now crumpled in a drawer where he had written, "You deserve someone whose love is simple, Taylor. Mine never was." That statement haunted her more than any love confession could. Steffi, meanwhile, fought tooth and nail in the Forrester boardroom to keep the company together. But whispers of a split were no longer whispers. Thomas had quietly partnered with a European investor, preparing a line bearing only his name, and RJ, caught in the middle, was torn between loyalty to a brother he barely trusted and a legacy he couldn't yet carry on his own. Hope Logan became Thomas's surprise confidant, her late-night visits to the design room less about business and more about the anguish of absence they both felt. Hers for a stepfather she had grown to like, his for a father he wanted to detest but couldn't. Liam, still frail after his recuperation, saw this with rising distrust, asking Hope one night, "Are we all simply pretending Ridge left for peace? Is there a bigger game that we aren't seeing?" Bill Spencer, never one to pass up an opportunity, braided himself into every vulnerable corner. A lunch with Brooke here, a late-night strategy call with Steffi there, a subtle whisper in Katie's ear about preserving the family name, which was actually about growing his own power. And Eric Forrester, weary and wise, called a secret family gathering without Ridge, a living will discussion disguised as a dinner, and said plainly, "I won't let this family tear apart while one man tries to fix his soul on a beach." It was at that point that Brooke made her decision. She would find Ridge, not to beg, not to chase, but to tell him the truth, that his absence had done more damage than his indecision ever had. Days later, she boarded a plane with Carter's research folder in hand, unaware that Nick Marone was already there, whispering to Ridge over whiskey about what Brooke really needs now, a man who stays. And in that tiny coastal village, as the sun bled into the Atlantic, Ridge faced a choice: return to the city he had left in ashes, or risk allowing Nick Marone to rewrite the story of his family in his absence. That night he dreamed of Eric fainting, Steffi signing documents she didn't understand, Brooke turning to Bill in fatigue, and when he awoke, the decision was no longer philosophical. It was about survival, not his but theirs. He packed the sketches, the letters he had never sent, the guilt he couldn't shake, and as dawn broke he murmured to himself, "If I go back as the man they need, not the ghost they remember." But as his car approached the airport, a black SUV blocked his path. Two men stepped outside. They were not Williams. They weren't Nick's. They held a message stamped with a Forrester crest he didn't recognize, and that, more than anything, told him that the real game in Los Angeles had only just begun.